Now, let me discuss the issue of charging. Now, for example, you hold a madrasa program, and in madrasa, you provide some sort of lunch, for example, but you also have some healthy snacks or some snacks, a tuck shop. This tuck shop, for example, might generate for you some income to pay for it. For example, you might have a hijab stall, or you might have, like a Zulfiqar, for example, a chain. So suddenly, it's something you can buy from abroad at an X amount of money, you're able to make 3 or 4 times the amount. Now that money is not going to your pocket, it goes to further your charity's objects, as the brother mentioned in the previous session, is that you have financial requirements and you're selling elements to which the funds that you raise are going to be used to further your elements. So for example, if you realize your budget is £10,000 a year, you have to think, okay, fine, from this £10,000 a year, how much can I get from one-off donations? Maybe 15, 20%. How much can I charge? So for example, I'm sure some madrasas, I don't know if all do madrasas charge? Yeah? Not free. So how could I, if the madrasa fees are not enough, how could I add more value that the madrasa, for example, is charges slightly more? How could I make parents feel? So when it comes down to charging, for example, you might invite parents into a parents' evening and then tell them, Assalamu alaikum, we've been dealing with kids. This is a report card for your child. He has been studying here for 2 years. We have taken him in fiqh from 35% to 50% in his exams. And so therefore, we can prove to you that his quality has improved. Now they are outsourcing to you the responsibility of teaching their kids about Islam. And so therefore they would pay handsomely because they feel guilty that they're not fulfilling that role. And they know they have no choice but to do that to make sure that you can support and fill that gap. Because they don't, in years to come, they will be hugely remorseful and regretful because their children are now not interested in religion whatsoever and have no knowledge whatsoever. And so if you can prove that value, you can able to, and if you show them transparently, say, listen, my cost here is £10,000. I need you to pay 10% more every year because of the following reasons. And if you can demonstrate that, people are most likely, and people pay for a kind of a service. And because you are getting dedicated volunteers, you're getting people, you're spending time and effort to prepare the slides, the content, the teachers, the food, everything that puts it together, that requires funding, and therefore you need to be able to demonstrate that is value for money. The second element is grants. Now, there are two types of grants. There's grants from religious organizations, like I used to be involved with the Mainstay Foundation. I'm not sure if you heard of them before. If you have, put your hand up. Okay. Are you aware of the Mainstay Foundation grants? No? Yes? Ahsant. Anyone else aware of the grants? So the Mainstay Foundation, they do a Muharram and Ramadan grant. So you can apply online. You receive maybe between £1,000 to £2,000 for Muharram and £1,000 to £2,000 for Ramadan. If you're a center, you're a registered charity. If you're not a charity, it becomes difficult. And you have a Muharram or Ramadan Majlis or a program. And you make an application. The application then is vetted and you receive grants. The other element also to think about is there is grants available to charities in the United Kingdom which are given based upon the fact that you provide certain activities. So if your activities are not purely religious, for example, you want to create a recreational trip for your madrasa students, and this trip would go to a 3-day camp or something. You can get money, for example, from Awards for All or Children in Need. Different charities provide you with grants of up to £10,000. But they normally do not encourage support processization, which is basically promotion of faith. So if you have an element of your program, you can just focus on the element which is the recreational element. So for example, you focus on the element of sports. So for example, I want to organize football training every Saturday after madrasa for 2 hours. And I want football hire, I want equipment, and I want coaches, FA, and you can obviously hire community members that have FA level 1 coaching. You can use the playground in the center, and that would justify the fees. It doesn't have to be part of the madrasa program, but obviously on paper, in reality, it's part of the madrasa program. But in reality, on paper, it's a football training program inside the center. And so funding is available for that in large scopes. We just have to be able to, approach these. There's many websites you can find online, and there's funding available at different things. And some of the funding, for example, I came across an application. You create awareness about gambling in the community. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone is gambling, but whoever is gambling and is keeping it a secret, you encourage people to say, okay, if you have a problem, how do you get help? You go to Gamble Aware, for example, and these things they don't contradict our faith. Or you can, for example, talk about, careers fair. We want to get funding to have a careers program inside our center, talk about different job prospects. Or we want to train our young kids in madrasa to do coding, for example. So one element, so you can get funding for that. That will help your overall structure. That will help your overall cost. Also, it shows parents that you are going beyond and over and beyond just the madrasa program. You're adding certain elements to enhance their soft skills, to enhance their capabilities, to be able to kind of, grow. So that is something that is available. And something that can be potentially explored. I know Luton community has done very well in some of these aspects. So it's something that is definitely something that should be considered and looked at, and maybe it's something that maybe Majlis Ulama can study and do a presentation, in detail to all the centers to say, okay, how can we explore this opportunity without, obviously, because they don't allow you to do tabligh and these grants, you have to be able to do it in a way that is functional, and it does not, you don't want to be saying something and you do something else. So you have to be very fair. Obviously, you're targeting faith communities. That's not a problem. You can say my community is a faith community. They're all religious people, but I want to help them get into better universities, and I want to create, and I'll bring in some academics to train them. Or sports. So you can explore the opportunity quite vastly. As I said, Mainstay Foundation. There's also the Aziz Foundation. Aziz Foundation is a non-Shia Muslim charity that provides funding for students to enter into university. So they provide scholarships. Again, that's something that maybe the MUS can look at to see how they can, collaborate. They don't distinguish between whatever your background is, but it's something maybe we can tap into, because getting a scholarship grant from for university students to study masters or PhD, it doesn't really go against our belief. So I think maybe looking outside that scope and seeing how you can potentially explore the idea. The other elements, other ways of obviously raising funds is the idea of charitable sponsorships. There is, of course, ways whereby you can approach businesses, you can approach charities. So as you know, as communities, you are directly dealing with grassroots people. So you might have, you're from Coventry. So you have a small community of, let's say, 50, 60, 70 people, for example. Now, some businesses want to target, somebody wants to sell a certain amount of clothing, they want to sell a package, they want to promote a ziyarah trip or something. And they give you a small donation to your charity, and in return, you expose that service to the community. In return, he's going to get, because obviously these ziyarah trips or these charitable, they receive a certain income from these trips, and so therefore you can leverage that and say, listen, we will also encourage people to go with you, but you also have to help us. So it's like a symbiotic relationship to encourage people that have some sort of similar businesses. Obviously, you don't want to promote a business that is completely against your faith. But there's so many businesses within our community, and some organizations, some individuals, they may have a business, for example, a travel agency, and they may choose to, instead of paying from their own income, they want to donate from their company because of tax, because they don't want to pay, as corporation tax, so they'd rather give it to a charity, and there's some tax rebates, and that way we say, look, we can allow you to have your business, on our. I'm not sure if some centers, after, for example, the program finishes, the TV shows would like to thank this place and this place and this, Muhammad's kebab shop, or this guy's, something like that. He's given maybe £50 a month, £20 a month, or even £100 a month, and you give him different packages. If he feels that it's value for money, he feels he's contributing towards the project, the center, he feels he's adding value, but at the same time, he's also making a donation and he's getting something in return. A businessman always wants something, businessmen are businessmen. The way they're successful is because they know how to, make the most. And some people want to give just anonymously. So attract, speak to businessmen and see how you can be able to engage them. But I've always found the most successful way to sustain your organization, to create sustainability, is to talk to the grassroots. So how many of us speak and spend time with every single member of our congregation? Engage them at a very low level, speak to them on a very basic one-to-one, and show them the value that this center or this organization is bringing to them. If we don't do that, if you're not engaging people at a very basic level, because if, for example, I can receive a donation, I can have a friend who's very wealthy, and this friend is giving me £10,000 a month to run this very good organization. But in time, one day this friend goes bankrupt, or there's political situation, or he gets caught in some, whatever. He's been too eager to make money, and he's been following the wrong ways. And eventually, something happens. Now, all your work that you've been doing, you're depending on one person, it will crumble. The community who's involved, so for example, if I have here 20 people, if these 20 people all commit to give £1 a month, something they can afford, one, they feel ownership. Because if I'm a stakeholder in the center by giving £1 a month, I feel now I'm part of the center. When I come here and I see the glass on the floor, I pick it up. But if I come and realize the center's been bought by someone else, I don't have a say, I'm not even respected, nobody looks at me, no one engages me. I come, they say salam to the people that have good money, but people that have no money, no one says salam to them. For example, I'm not saying we do that, but sometimes, we become vulnerable to this because we realize, oh, mashallah, this brother's here, let's, and the other guy is poor guy, maybe he has a lot to give in ideas and passion and volunteering, and he could maybe give more than this other person, but we neglect him, and so we lose him as a valuable donor. So he may have given once, by the way, but because he felt aggrieved and no one engaged him, he has lost interest and walked away. So I always believe that having a strong membership and paying a small amount of £5, £3, £6, whatever, something small and minute, but scaling that up. And then once you get them through the door by paying a small amount, then you say, okay, retention. Brother, your own choice, no one's forced him. And if you do that, it's a bit harder because you're talking to you say, I am the senior member here, I don't want to talk to everybody, it's too much work. But this is it. If he feels that he's been appreciated, he will increase his donation, and suddenly everyone now is volunteering. Everyone now is active. Everyone now is passionate. He starts bringing his family with him. Tomorrow his kids grow up, his kids are now donating towards the center. And if you start from the grassroots up, it becomes an interesting story. I went once to a center, Maulana, it's a very interesting story. I went to a center in one of the communities, and the Maulana was giving Jum'ah prayer. And then he finished Jum'ah prayer, Jum'ah khutbah, he did the namaz, and then he finished and he walked out. I was like, subhanAllah, this Maulana is so busy. He just left. He didn't want to, normally you stay behind, you say salam, you talk to people. So I was like, where's he gone? It's a bit like, I feel a bit, I felt a bit odd. So I was walking out and I saw him by the outside on the door. So the door where the ladies and the men go out. So, he wasn't just on the men's side, he was greeting everybody. And he was saying, Brother Askar, how are you? Where's your sister? Where's your brother? I haven't seen him for 2 weeks. Brother Haidar, where are you? Karrar, I haven't seen your uncle. He hasn't been. Where's your daughter? How's Muhammad? Did he pass the exam? He was checking up on everybody. And that if someone, every time I go and someone checks up on me, I was just like, where's my card? Let me just make a donation. And I'm sure his intention is not that. It's not money driven, but it's about building a sustainable. This is the thing. I think the word sustainable, a lot of people can raise money to, like let's say for example, you can do a big fundraising drive, raise 100K. But after the 100K, you buy a center, for example, and I had to pay £10,000 a month. That hurts more than the 100K. Because to raise monthly for life is really difficult. And so that's why you have to find ways. You budget, you break down into smaller bits, and you say, okay, fine. Maybe I have one uncle who's going to give me 5,000 a month. He's the big guy. But then I have to go to the ground and maybe £3 a month. That's all very important, because those people also bring other people in, and I create inclusivity. So that is a very important element. And if we can employ that, that will really give us something to be able to be sustainable. So I'll give you an example. In Ahl Bayt TV, we were £80,000 in cost per month. That we managed to, we started something called the Become a Partner, 3,000 partners. And so we would have, for example, we would have like 2,000 people giving. So we said the Shia community in the UK is 300,000. What's 1% of 300,000? 3,000, right? So we said out of 100, 100 portions, we target 1% of the community. And we asked them to give £20 a month. And obviously the benefit, so we're saying maybe 1% of the people watch us, and from that 1%, we'll ask them to give. So we managed to reach, for example, to a certain number. I think we hit, once upon a time, we hit about £45,000 a month from membership. So that effectively lifts a very heavy weight off your shoulder. You no longer are depending on you need the big amounts, but you're also depending on the grassroots. The other element that I found very useful in fundraising is some organizations are doing this now, is that in Kushalis or Mawlud programs, they give out raffle prizes. So they would have, for example, let's say they go to this uncle, he donates an iPad, this guy donates a pen, this guy donates what's they call this thing, cupping, blood cupping. Someone, like hijama for two. So you have these free gifts. I tell people, buy a raffle, £10 for 3 raffles, and donation goes towards the center, and then you can maybe win something. And people buying, some guys are making sometimes they're making £2,000 to £3,000 just on a normal small community Ulada program. But if you ask them just donate blindly, it's like, I've given already, I want something, but you see there's some gifts here, people are more likely to give to this. So a lot of people are doing this idea. The other element is introducing creative ideas. So there's ideas where you can organize a community bazaar. A lot of, for example, sisters or even some brothers, they have something to sell. Someone's making cupcakes at home, someone's making, I don't know, different kind of, everyone's got hobbies now. Some people are painting, they become artists. And then you can have a position where you invite all the people that have small businesses at home to come in the mosque and display their elements. They could pay you, for example, £200 or something for each stall, and you have maybe, let's say, 10 stalls, you make 2,000, and then you tell them everyone comes that day and people will buy from you, and each one will make a sizable amount of income. And that's one way of generating a small portion of income for your community. Organizing events, bazaars. You can organize charity fundraising dinners, but again, these are all, and if anybody, by the way, has any specific question about what I'm saying, feel free just to interrupt. It's not a monologue. If you have any kind of specific kind of, because I'm just branching out to different ideas, and I just want to allow everyone to have that. The other element that a charity commission encourages is you should be able to have a reserve. They say you need to have 6 months of operation funding in your account. So, for example, if you're running a school and your school costs £1,000 a day, for example, every week, and you need to have X amount of money. So, what 6 months of operational cost? God forbid your account, you lose all your donations. You have a reputational damage. Your charity is accused of, by the community of someone doing something bad, and at least that money can keep you going until you can resolve any disputes, any issues with trustees, any major problems. So that then gives you some sustainability, that you're not working hand to mouth. So when you're budgeting in place, let's say your annual budget for the year, you say, okay, my annual budget includes this much income. I need to make sure that I have some reserves in place to be able to, for it to be a buffer. So God forbid something happens, I'm able to kind of take that on the chin and be able to.
It's specified in the charity commitment.
So it's recommended. It's recommended that you have, because the reason being is that they say, okay, fine, you are sponsoring orphans in Africa, and tomorrow, and you have £100, you give them £100, and you say khalas. But they said you're supposed to. It's a monthly donation. You know, suddenly you tell the orphan after 1 month, I've got no money. Find your own way. So that shows you have no care. Likewise, you're running a school, and people have paid £100 a year for the school child to go every day to madrasa. Now you've committed to finish until when? June, July, for example. You started in September and you're supposed to finish in June, July, and suddenly the money that you had, you've used it all up. You haven't, so how, just in case I have a problem, I need to make sure that I have the reserve to keep me going and I fulfill the commitment of the people. But let's say, for example, you are running a center, as I said, and you're not committed to the whole Kushali every time. And people are donating, but for you to, as trustees or as organizers, you need to be able to have a contingency. God forbid something happens, that the donor who's supposed to give you money last week has now decided to disappear. You have some contingency in place so that your charity does not suffer a reputational damage. Because the charity suffers reputational damage, people are like, oh, this charity is not organized, it's not professional, it's not working within the, it's not working within professional setup. They're not budgeting, they're not creating reserves, there's no sustainability model. A very common word we used to hear when we used to fundraise, he goes, we don't want to fund a sinking ship. This is what people's argument is. So, what do you mean? It's look, your charity, your organization is just taking money, it's sinking. It's going to sink today or next year, it's inevitable. So it's just a matter of time before you guys sink. And so therefore, if you show them a sustainability model, say, no, if you give me this much, I will raise from here, here, here. I have 3 events a year I'm organizing fundraising for. I have membership, this much money. I have my, I'm charging advertising, for example, this much money. So you show him, but he says, I have a deficit now of £10,000. Help me, and I'm good for, next year I'll come for you for 5, the year I'll come for you for 3. Within 3 years, I should be able to be sustainable. If you don't have a very watertight budget, there was a brother from Al-Asr, what's his name, Maulana? I can't remember his name. He just came now. I saw him. No. One of the brothers. He's a financial analyst. He's very good at budgeting, for example. So I think so. Yeah, I don't know. So, for example, if you don't have a strong, budget in place, you don't have some sort of contingency, and you go to a donor and you say, look, guys, and if you break your word after, and you say, oh, I needed 10, but I still need another 20. So sometimes we have situations where people say, give us 50,000 or give us 20,000 this year, and next year, inshallah, will be. And if you break that word, then people lose trust in you because you've promised something that you could not deliver. And that is a big problem. So that's why it comes back to our initial point, is that unless you have a very strong budget and you always put contingency, for example, it's going to cost you £100 a day, you say, let's put 120 just in case there's mishaps or there's miscalculations, there's something. That gives me the protection in place that just in case, God forbid, I have a problem, I can lean into that amount. But if you break your word and you don't show that you can accurately budget, you don't show that you can accurately work within a certain sphere, then once people lose trust in you, then it's pretty much all over. The other thing I'll speak about, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there are two things. For example, Islamic Center, they'll have overhead expenses. So obviously they have a budget for overhead. So they should keep reserve, as you say. But then there are donations for Sadaqah, Fitra, and all those. And usually those things have to be paid out straight away, depending on how much has come. So it varies.
So restricted funding that comes into your charity, you cannot touch. So someone says, I want to make a donation to orphans, you're pretty much done for. That money has to go towards orphan regardless.
Straight away.
If, for example, someone gives you money, general donation, I would like to support your charity to undertake the good work that you do as part of your objects, the charity decides how to keep that amount. But when I mean contingency, is I mean, for example, let's say if the Islamic center or any center has a cost of 5,000, 10,000 pounds a month for salaries, then they should say, okay, fine, how do we raise money? And obviously that comes down to issue of endowments. Many charities, as you know, they buy properties, they rent them out, they buy multiple properties, they buy commercial sites. It doesn't have to be next door, for example. You can go, for example, you say Leeds now is really the best place, or Blackburn or Blackpool, where I can buy X amount of properties. I give it to a company, they guarantee me rent, everything is, contract in place. I'm generating, let's say 20%, 15% revenue. And mashallah, there's a lot of people in our community that are very good at these things. We lean on them, say, guys, come, how could we fundraise? They said, if you just let's raise 200K, then you go to donors, you go to a rich man, and someone said, listen, you give me 200,000 pounds, I'll buy a property. This will generate for us, let's say 20% per year income. Then you say to him, you can keep the property under your name. So it's like qarza hasana. It's not qarza hasana. He's basically putting his money in an asset, and that asset still belongs to him. So there's no chance of us as a charity to take that money and misuse it. It belongs to him, and in actual fact, there's appreciation, right? That the value of the property will increase. But then you say, alhamdulillah, now I'm getting 4,000 pounds a month coming in fixed. And you look at your budget, you've now covered 20, 30% of your budget. And you're not asked someone to give anything towards that. So this uncle says, you know what? Alhamdulillah, you've done this is for you now. Keep it. They'll normally say, keep it. Because I see that, but as waqf, do not sell it or misuse it. And a lot of organizations do this. So this is something that you need to, because as I said, eventually we cannot depend on, we can't take the whole budget and just take one strategy. We have to break down into small chunks. So if it's X amount, 10% from this place, 10% from endowment fund, 10% from public fundraising, 10% from charity sponsorship, 10% from membership, and that will collectively make it work. Otherwise, it becomes a hugely challenging element. The other thing as well is, how do we retain our donors? Sometimes we're far too obsessed of just recruiting people to become donors, but those who have donated, we forget about them. And then in time, because we don't update them, we don't give them, there's no transparency in our work, we don't give them information, we don't give them data. I think Salah is in a few minutes, right, Maulana?
Yes.
But I will continue in whenever Azan plays.
5 minutes.
Okay, inshallah. Ahsantum. So the issue I want to speak about, so obviously donor retention, you need to have a strategy for that. As an organization, how do I retain my donors? How do I keep them engaged? Do I have an AGM? Who has an AGM here? An organization? Annual general meeting? You have? So an AGM where you get everyone together, all your community members, your congregation, and you say, guys, last year we've done this. We've raised £400,000. We've spent £420,000. We've spent on this. Here's the graphs, here's the impact, here's the stories, here's the pictures, here's the videos, here's the media. Everything's here. And everyone say, you know what, subhanallah, I'm ready to give more. But if you don't do that, this guy says, I'm going to give to this other charity because they called me, they sent me a picture of orphans, they want to, they've made their effort. These people don't make an effort, I'm going to give my money to someone else. Unfortunately, this will happen. So you've brought someone on board, but you haven't cared for him, and you haven't taken care of him, and you've lost him. So in a few minutes, I want to do also what makes people donate. What is the kind of the underpinning factor? What makes someone put their hands in their pocket and take out a £10 note? Now, obviously, the first and most important element, which everyone's aware of, is the idea of religion, right? So, for example, in the name of Imam Zaman, in the name of the Ma'soomeen, and people have that affinity and they give. But over and beyond that is, you need to show that whoever's the management of this organization, that they are, one, transparent, right? Two, they are, so for example, we mentioned a lot of laws in the previous session about compliance. these compliance issues of being conflict of interest. For example, the trustee who is in charge is suddenly he's paying for his TV license, for example. The brother mentioned. So how do we things like that will say to people, I no longer want to donate. So transparency is very important. Being due diligent, being making sure that there's no conflict of interest of your work, but at the same time, really having that personal, emotional connection. This is the number one way that you can encourage. If I invite uncle to my house and we have some samosa and some, I'm sure there's good food as well, I can smell it from the morning. But when you break food together, and he's a donor of one of my charities, and and we talk about the work, we really get to the details, we talk about, he sees I'm passionate, I believe in this, I'm not just doing it, if you show him the passion, and there's an emotional connection, there's that personal touch that you have built with him, then you have won him over. And you continuously engage him, you continuously show him the impact of the work. The impact is the most important thing. So if you show the impact, the end product, you show, for example, you bring a student up, if it's a madrasa, they bring a student up over here, say, Bismillah, read me Surah Al-Waqi'ah. And this child couldn't speak Arabic, let's say a year ago. Now he's memorized Surah Al-Waqi'ah. The parents say, you know what, subhanallah. Yeah, something I couldn't do in 15 years with this child, you have done in 6 months. Bismillah, I want to help. So having that trust, the emotional connection, showing the impact to people is really kind of the most important element. I had some exercises to do, but I think our time is limited. Sorry about that.
I have two questions regarding first of all, in terms of, you mentioned about the grants and all that. Will you share that information to all of us in some manner?
So I mentioned three different aspects of grants. One is Shia, one is non-Shia, and one is non-Muslim. So I can send to MUS. They can then send the internal memo and just explain what is the process. As I said, the non-Muslim one, it's little bit controversial because you have to be able to be you have to be transparent, and it has to be and you have to make sure they don't apply for every grant because some grants have some restrictions and they have some attached. You have to do this in return. So you have to be very careful. That's why it's better that the umbrella organization filters this down to you in a way that does not impact you in any way or form.
And the second thing is you haven't mentioned about the gift aid.
Okay.
Can you explain that? We want to go into that area.
Yeah, gift aid is a very important factor, but there's something that you have to be wary of about gift aid. So gift aid is a very basic idea. If I donate £100 from my account to your charity, I sign a form, a declaration to say I give consent. It has to be written, you have to be able to have access to it and keep records for 6 years. I consent for my money to be used as gift aid. You can then go to HMRC and claim 25%. The challenge here, which is very important, the challenge here is that if you are donating more than 20% of your salary, for example, uncle here's salary is £30,000, mashallah, he's donating £10,000 every month. How's he doing that? So then HMRC might say, hold on a second, brother, this guy is giving so much gift aid money, how is he generating this much money? So then, he shows you that he has saving and something, he's all clear, but this will raise issues after. If someone so make sure whoever's doing gift aid, just make sure that when you're applying, because then if you get questioned, they'll open up the file about everything. They'll see every single this guy. So make sure whoever donates, and the other element, whoever does gift aid, last thing, whoever does gift aid, if for example I do £10,000 gift aid as doctor, suddenly you're now donating to my son. So unfortunately, do not misuse the element of gift aid. You have to be extra vigilant on how we do things. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.